Welcome to Unmuted Nation, and it's time for more of the Hear Me series. If you've been following along this series, you know that we've been talking to all sorts of Black people just to hear their truth, their perspective, and their opinions on life. Sometimes we make assumptions about people and things, and whether male, female, trans, whatever the designation or however people identify, we all have our own assumptions that are fueled by misinformation and sometimes just plain ignorance. So we've gone out of our way to talk to people just about their lives and about their truth. And I've been blown away constantly with all of the stories. And if you missed any part of this series, you're going to want to dive in. Today, we're talking to another amazing person. Sydney, welcome to Unmuted Nation.
Ooh. Hello. Well, happy to be here, Alex.
Hey, so welcome to Unmuted Nation. I always have to say to people named Sydney, I love the name. My dad and my brother are named Sydney. Like the entire lineage of Sydneys. My grandfather, so it just like it just keeps going.
Yes.
So it's a great name. So anyway, welcome to Unmuted Nation. I like to just kick things off learning a little bit about you. So if you don't mind just telling me like where you're from, where you grew up, and what you do.
Sure. I grew up outside Chicago in a tiny little suburb called Morton Grove on the north side.
Okay.
I did my undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania, so I spent some time in Philly, lived in Europe for about 5 years, and moved to New York, which is where I currently live. And I work as a producer for the hit show on HBO Max called Legendary. And I also work as a writer, contributing writer for the New York Times, Advice, as I'm a very active member of the Ballroom community. I'm a member of the House of Extravaganza. I vogue. I write about voguing. I throw balls. I do all the things. And right now I'm writing a book actually about the history of the Ballroom community in New York City.
Very cool. So you're a very busy person. Let's start there. I was trying to count the things that you do, and I'm like, I feel like I am busy all the time. I don't even have them written out. Like I don't know that I can recount. Like if someone asked me like, what do you do? I'd be like, it really depends on the day. So you are a part of it. I want to talk about all of that, and I don't know if we'll have that much time, but we'll start off talking about I guess this series a little bit. And so every part of this series has been really, really interesting. I learned a lot, and what I tell people often is that you limit yourself in life when you choose not to learn. So I think that this series is something that we decided to do that was totally like, it's really not the popular thing, because we're not talking about just a bunch of mess, or we're not talking about the latest scandal, but really we just started talking about people. And what we found is that everybody has a different story, but we all have assumptions when we meet. It took more time to understand the person. We would see humanity change a little bit, at least get back to being humane, because we don't see enough humanity these days, and it's mostly because people don't talk to each other. They don't want to know each other.
Very true.
So they don't feel each other. So I like starting out just to ask you about your childhood, and just as a child, like what were some things that you really enjoyed doing?
As a kid growing up outside Chicago in the 90s, My goodness. I mean, I was really into sports. I played tennis for a very long time. My dad got me deep into that. And I was really into basketball. I feel like if you were in Chicago in the 90s, it was all about the Bulls or some sort of Bulls adjacent thing. And yeah, you know, I grew up in, I'd say, somewhat middle class family in a very diverse neighborhood. Like, I feel like I was very lucky. We were kind of like minorities of minorities as like the Black family on the block. Yeah, it was just, you know, I remember my aunt used to live with us, and she really instilled in us sort of like an understanding about being curious about the world, reading books, and just studying and working hard. I'm half Trini on my mom's side and half African American on my dad's side, and I feel like the combination of those two has just kind of like propelled me in so many ways of like that West Indian, you know, like work hard, do well in school, which is also on the African American side. Although I also feel like that side, both sides gave me just so much cultural capital and in a certain way about relating to people, being open to different ideas, and different perspectives, and, you know, just knowing that I can do anything. I think that's the biggest thing is like knowing that, you know, all the things that I have been able to accomplish are 100% part of my foundation.
Nice. So one thing I like to do in these conversations is share, like, it's not really about me, but I will always, it's so the conversation doesn't seem one-sided. I like to give context because, again, like I say, people make assumptions. So I grew up, like, I would say probably middle-class family. Definitely an upper middle-class area, all these white people. And I was a token a lot of times, but it was crazy because when I tell people I'm from Atlanta, they don't imagine that can be the case, but obviously it's a real thing. So I think that type of exposure, you said Trini, my best friend growing up was Trini, and I was like really connect. My second mother was like yelling at me all the time to work hard. Like we all got it the same, and it's like Caribbean has not left my spirit. Like, my best adult friends are Jamaican and Haitian.
So, nice, yeah.
I have all of these Caribbean parents, my own Black American parents. So it's an experience because we all get pushed the same, you know.
Yes.
Once they adopt you in mind, it just is what it is.
Right.
I think childhood really kind of it can be a propeller or a limiter, and so a lot of times in I think what exposure makes a world of difference, and I think people are often afraid of what they don't know. And so when children are exposed earlier or early in life to different things, and they're allowed to question things and they're allowed to be curious about things, then they actually they achieve fulfillment much earlier. And I think you find the same thing in adults. Maybe they find a knack for traveling later in life and they start to travel a lot. And the more that you see, the more you're able to appreciate and not really question or denounce, because limited experiences can be really, really traumatic. And you may not even know that you've been traumatized with your limited experience. You just and I talk to, even I have family that like, I've been in the country my whole life. I ain't leaving the country. All I know is country. And I'm like, that's all you know. Literally. And that's all you know. And that is also why you may not be open to things that seem foreign to you, because you haven't had that exposure. So when you were growing up, and I know that every story is differently, so please bear with me, correct me if I make a misstatement. I'm always learning. And I think, and I openly share that my learning about the trans community has been because of me deciding to do my own research. And I think the more that I learn about the community, the more that I consider myself an ally, but the more that I learn, the more that I like snap on people when they're wrong with my limited information, right? Because I don't know all, right? But I think what I do know is that everybody's story is different, and so while some people have always known how they identify, and that could be because of the environment they were in that kind of cultivated them expressing themselves and what they feel. And sometimes people may not know. So for you, just walk me through like what the trans experience in your life has been like, and from discovery and acceptance. And I have another question rooted in that, but I'm
okay. Well, first, Alex, I just want to say that is fantastic. I'm very pro. Like, we live in the information age. Google, Google, Google is always your friend if you have questions. So that's so powerful that you do that, and I think it's so great that you like encourage other folks to do that too. For me, let's see, my trans story. It's so interesting because I feel like I went through different stages in my life. It's like, growing up, I was very much a tomboy, you know, all about sports, all that stuff, always hanging out with my dad. And I grew up Catholic. My parents were converts, and you know, I always feel like converts, they always try to do a little extra, you know. They're like, we want to make up for the lost time, so we're going to take all of this very seriously. So I feel like just any sort of queer LGBTQ, it's not like we had family friends who were gay identified. My Aunt Vaughn, who is like such a light for me, identified as a lesbian and had a partner. And, you know, we loved Auntie Vaughn. So I remember when I was in college and I first came out as gay, this is like before I started transitioning, I identified as a woman. And you know, it was just like the first time I was away from home. And I think like, having that time and space away from your family to really think about like, who are you, right? Which is kind of like, you know, what is supposed to happen or what does happen on some level in adolescence. But oftentimes they say like LGBTQ people, we have like the second adolescence in a way. And it's just because we're trying to figure out ourselves and kind of, you know, be at ease with ourselves. And I remember at the time, I just felt really comfortable with this like identity of like being a lesbian, identifying as queer, and queer meaning, you know, that I have a certain level of consciousness around being gay, that it's not just like rainbow flags and parties at Pride, that it's about actually standing up against injustice and being part of a longer lineage around that. And so really like transitioning for me kind of like, or, you know, transitioning from identifying as a woman to identifying as a man came a lot later. And I think that might have also had to do with the changing nature around trans visibility, because let's see, I was in college, it was like 2007 to like 2011. And I think like access to trans healthcare, also trans people in media and just generally being more visible, it wasn't as present the way it is now. And it was actually when I was living abroad in Europe where I was in queer communities around a lot of other like trans and non-binary identified people that I began to see certain versions of myself. And definitely
let's I want you to keep going because I'm so engaged.
Sure.
But let's talk about that a little bit. Just okay. Like how you saw different versions of yourself. I don't know that everybody has that experience, right?
Yes.
I think that a lot of, and I'm not going to say it's unique to the trans experience, but I think a lot of people don't start to see themselves later in life.
Yes.
And so when that started happening, how were you responding to that? Like, were you like, wait a minute?
Yeah.
I think that's me.
Yeah. Well, here's what happened. It's funny because I feel like I crept out of the trans closet, you know, like for some people, they have this, you know, innate feeling they've always known, you know, deep down inside, this is not who I am. And my story wasn't really like that. And I think it might, you know, who knows, maybe it's the Catholic upbringing. It was like so deep down that I never knew, or, and it's also a question of language. I think it was like, you know, in the 90s or even that, you know, we didn't have language around. I mean,
even we'll talk about language, but you're right. There's just not.
Yeah.
People don't know. And as much as Google is the friend, I think when you get to a certain point, I've talked about this before, there's a certain generation, like the baby boomers, they're not trying to relearn the definition of gender. They don't want to relearn like that there could be your sex was misidentified or that they are misgendering someone. They don't even want to hear it. And that's partial upbringing, but also stubbornness. Like you kind of feel slated or slighted if you're being re-educated later in life and you feel educated. Like when you feel like an educated person, and that's the other side of it that I think a lot of times in the PC culture that we kind of live in right now, people are afraid to say that they don't know.
Right.
And they don't want to admit that they don't know because it means that they missed education somewhere. But it doesn't necessarily, or they feel like it means that, but that's not necessarily what it means.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that because I think sometimes, well, one, I think just generally part of eradicating toxic masculinity, which is, I feel like a conversation that comes up all the time, to me is humbling yourself and being willing to say when A, you don't know something, or B, that you're new to learning something and that you're open to it. And I think what usually happens is once people know a trans person, this is where things change, because then it's like, oh, no, you're talking about my friend. I'm not, or my cousin or my niece or my nephew. Like, you're not going to talk like that, So, yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. But I mean, for me, again, just like creeping out of this trans closet, it actually kind of came through Ballroom in a way. At the time when I was living in Europe, I was walking balls. I was, I walked voguing categories, but there was one day where there was a realness category, which for those who aren't familiar, in the ballroom community, it's, a world of like fashion, dance, competition. If you watch shows like Pose or Legendary, it highlights the community and the competition. And there's this category that exists called Realness for trans people, or also for gay people, to basically portray an archetype in society. And so the idea is, there could be, for example, an executive realness category for what we call butch queens or gay men in the community. And the idea is that you have to come presented like an executive, like with a briefcase and business cards and everything. And so there was this ball that I walked in Paris some years ago, and the category was, in French, it was, you had to bring it like a racaille, which kind of means like a thug. It was kind of like a teeny bopper thug. And I remember I saw the flyer, and I asked my housemother at the time, I was like, what's this? And she's like, Sid, this is a category for you, because it was a butch realness category. It was for butch lesbians. And it was basically for a butch lesbian to portray kind of like a thuggish boy, right? Okay. And so I got ready. I had my my sweater, my sweats, my whole look. My hair was already cut short because that was the look I was rocking. And I remember people went up for me. They just went bananas. And it was the first time my masculinity was really affirmed in a place, which was huge, because for me, growing up as a girl, especially as a Black girl, it's like every bit and part of your body is constantly being critically examined. It's like your hair, your butt's too big, your lips are, all this stuff. And then for me to just come out and present like a guy and be, people were living for me because they could see me in my authentic truth. That was the beginning, because I was like, wow, okay, like this felt so good. And then after that, that's kind of when I saw more Black trans men, specifically from the ballroom scene in New York City, people like Teak Milan, who, speaks out a lot on Black trans issues. And I was like, oh my God, those are trans guys? Like, they look amazing. I want to look like that. Like I could actually live my life and be successful and whatever, do what I want to do in this world. And, that was the beginning. And it started me on this whole journey, which, obviously has just been amazing.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I think that the entire, just I think your moment of enlightenment, or the climax of that story is just riveting, because I think people, like I said, people make assumptions, and they feel like, oh well, he must have always felt this way, or he always knew that this was going to happen, he just didn't know when, and I don't know. Like, I've heard so much speculation, and so I think it's important to be as accurate as possible. I think. Well, I want to know, so you were living in Europe when this happened. So after that moment, then what?
So at the time, I was actually doing the first year of my master's program in urban planning at a school called Sciences Po in Paris. And then I was on to going to London at the London School of Economics to do the second year. And that's, when I had more flexibility and sort of like connecting with different queer communities, et cetera. And I started doing the work that I do now, which is oral histories of the ballroom community. That was what my master's thesis was, as I was looking at how the geography of New York City affected the history and evolution of the ballroom scene. And I was doing like oral histories interviews in New York, talking to older people in the community about their history and sort of documenting that. And of course, I was meeting lots of trans people and just kind of like, you know, again, getting deeper into just celebrating who I am. And in so many ways, ballroom was that thing for me, because even though I was living in Europe, I was amazed. There's been, you know, this explosion of ballroom around the world, and especially in Europe. And I was like, wow, okay, so ballroom shows me that my Blackness can coincide with my transness. And that was the big thing for me, because I think in a way, I couldn't really see myself in a lot of Black spaces. I think, especially in undergrad at UPenn, it's like, you know, there was just kind of this very heavy heteronormative middle class sort of like, you know, energy, especially in the spaces that I was in and like working in Capitol Hill or, you know, other aspects of public policy. And then with ballroom, it's like, oh, okay, like these people, they remind me of my auntie, and you're trans. Like, I was like, oh, wow, you could do that too. So,
you know what? I think that, and I want to take another pause, because I think you said so many things that I don't want to glaze over, because
okay.
I think just like I'm captivated by your story, I think so many people watching and listening will be. When you said that you were working on your thesis, but you said you had the opportunity to talk to older people in the community. I want to go back to that, because there are a lot of people that think that this phenomenon has just become on us. Trans people have just appeared, and they are taking over our families and our livelihood, and they're coming. And I'm like, no, you know, but who am I to tell them, like, you do some research? So when you were talking to older people and their experiences, did that give you hope, or like just talk to me about how you felt then?
Oh my gosh, you know, it was amazing, because also with so many of these stories, I was like, we were laughing, we were crying. And honestly, it was when I originally had reached out to, so the father of my house at the time, I was in the house of Omni, and talking to Kevin, who's like in his 60s, Black, gay, out, proud, has been for decades, worked on Wall Street. You know, I was just like amazed that there could be somebody who reminds me a lot of my biological dad, who has just lived his life openly out, gay, proud, and, you know, that's what it is. And I think that it was also eye-opening for me, is, you know, when you talk about visibility, I was like, wow, okay, I don't know how many times people see stories like that, because especially in the LGBTQIA community, there's so much emphasis placed on youth. You know, it's just like, I feel like with pride, with parties, with, you know, just the way things are structured, you rarely see older individuals. And some of that, if I'm being very honest with you, sadly, is also a result of the AIDS crisis in the 80s. We just lost entire generations of especially Black and Latino LGBTQ people. And there is like a missing, you know, hole as far as like our elders in the community in that way. But for many of them who are still around, they're still here. We just, you know, to me, it's a question of, are we listening? Are we asking questions? Are we trying to connect? And in many ways, that's actually why Ballroom, I think, is really unique, is that it has this family structure, which allows children, the children of the house, to be in contact with people who are older than you, to hear the stories, to know the history.
Sure. I think also you said, and I think it's crazy. I was just learning that the life expectancy for a Black trans woman is like 35.
Yeah.
And like things that people don't realize, that there's not legacy there. So when you're able to connect with it, there's huge power there. But another thing you said is that you had never seen yourself. Yes. And so you were able to see yourself within this community, which I think that's another assumption that has to be corrected so often, because people are like, well, you're walking in the world, how can you not see yourself in others, and not realizing that these communities are important for people that are shunned by society in so many ways. And sometimes, I mean, we're things are, I don't know if I would be erroneous to speak, because I do state, while we see progress, we also see, you know, some movements taking us decades back. Right. And so I think that impacts everything. That impacts children. I think you were
Yes.
able to find and just kind of find your own lane, and that you were comfortable doing that. I don't. What could people do if you were, because you said you were more so a tomboy growing up.
Yes.
Did you feel like because I think people, me included, but they're always curious, because I think there's not just a moment, like that that you made the decision sometimes, and this goes back to so many things, right? Life is a spectrum, and our lives are spectrums, and you are at different places at different times. Based on your experiences and your exposure, I love understanding, like, even how you walked me through your moments of enlightenment. Do you feel like, because I know that in some places, I love the fact that you just kind of talked about your family and the openness and the opportunity and the exposure there. Did you ever feel like, I don't want to miss this question because I've asked it in every session. Did you ever feel like, because of how you felt, that you had to grow up a little earlier, or grow up internally, because there was no one to explain to you what was actually happening?
Ooh, this is a good question. I mean, well, one thing I'll say, it's interesting talking to you about all this now, because I'd never, put the pieces together of, it was my foundation of knowing I can do and be anything, like that Black and West Indian foundation of, like, I am really smart. I have opportunity if I want to take it, and I can go and do and be whatever I want to be. So
it makes a difference, and I can't deviate from this because it's something that I say often. Being from Atlanta, I'm based in New York now, but being from Atlanta and seeing Black people being able to do everything,
yes,
is a difference maker, because I know people from other parts of the country and other parts of the world where they were like, yeah, there was like one Black doctor in our community, everybody knew him, and I grew up with multitudes of Black doctors and lawyers and teachers and business owners and mayors, and everything was Black. So a Black kid in Atlanta never believes that they can't do anything, and that adds to the story. And in your case, I think that adds to the story.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, I also have to, again, give my parents credit, because, like, we were constantly, we had Jet Magazine, Ebony, and, like, you're constantly being bombarded with Black greatness. So that that's part of your destiny in a way. So, like, in a sense, I always kind of had this understanding of, like, I work hard, I study hard, I'm going to go to an Ivy League school, I'm going to go see the world. And in a way, like, trans almost like crashed into that, because it was like, oh, wow, okay, I guess I'm also trans, and how that kind of came later. But, for me, that it definitely was a process. And I'm not going to say, because I think for my parents, what was a little hard is that I was kind of like living abroad, so I wasn't always in touch with them. And I remember just kind of being a little worried, because even though we had family friends who might have been gay identified, I remember before I first came out to my mom as a lesbian, I wasn't sure if, okay, is there, that's them, this is us. But then when I told her, she was pretty cool about it. And then coming out to her as trans, that was like another layer of just sort of like, okay, if that's who you are, that's who you are. And with my mom, it definitely has been a process of, like, helping her with pronouns, for example. Just, sometimes she slips up, but one of the biggest, and she just corrects herself, but I think the times changed a lot, because I remember when I first came out as trans, and she was working in a hospital, and she knew there were other trans people there. So it's like, the world had changed. She was, like, interfacing with trans people, and she understood, okay, like, that's just part of your identity and part of who you are. And I would say one of the most healing moments was when I had top surgery about 3 years ago, and my mom was there by my bedside helping me all the way through it as far as recovery. And it was like this beautiful, beautiful moment for us to kind of, like, connect on this certain level, and for her to support me in ways that maybe, like, growing up, she really wasn't able to. And a lot of that was just like, you know, just again, ignorance or just not knowing like, oh, actually my child isn't weird or a problem to be fixed. It's like, that's who they are. And I think what's important is for us to also give people grace in that way. You know, it's
Sure.
like, not everybody's going to get pronouns right away. And I always feel like when people slip up, you can tell the intention behind it. If it's like, oh, sorry, you know, and sorry. And for
the malicious intent versus the
exactly.
sadness.
Yeah, you just messed up. And also, you know, especially for people who've known me for decades, like, you know, I mean, I'm going to correct you and, I want you to make the effort. But, you know, I feel like canceling people for stuff like that is a bit too harsh. And, you know, I think it's much better to have a dialogue and really just kind of open things up sometimes.
I totally agree with that. What do you think acceptance does? Like, how has people embracing you and being open and accepting, because of the, like, in some areas we are seeing a lot of progress and we are seeing a lot of change. How has that changed, or has that changed the way that you feel? Just that people are more accepting of just you. Now, like, it's not a big deal, but it's acknowledgement and acceptance. Does that matter?
Well, acceptance, yes, 100%, because it's about being comfortable. It's about being comfortable in our work lives and our private lives. You know, and I have to say, I think, you know, for some people, it's definitely a process. Like, I have been in different spaces. I know this was like one of the questions I think that that was posed before was like, you know, how is transit, or like, how has my experience been in different Black spaces? And I think one of the harsher realities I had is when I was doing a PhD program in Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, I had an extremely transphobic experience. And it was, you know, very unfortunate, but I could tell that part of the issue was the people around me were flabbergasted that I could be Black and trans, really smart, very talented, know what I'm doing, and you know, be successful. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, our community can, like, you know, dampen, right? Like, they're like, Blackness has to look this way, or, you know, like, you're trans, and there might be like an implicit bias that people have where they think that you're actually inferior to them. And then when you show up and you show out and actually you're not, and maybe you might know more than they do, they are honestly gag. And sometimes you know, people have a problem with that. So I think part of the acceptance is just one, accepting all the shades of transness, of Blackness that people are. I think it's also about showing up, and that means being advocates, allies, and accomplices. Advocates meaning, like, when we're not in the room, that you are speaking out on our behalf if, you know, something transphobic comes up or somebody says something. Being an ally of, like, you know, when trans people ask you to show up for us, you show up. And that might mean, you know, donating to our GoFundMes for surgery. That might mean showing up to support us, checking in on us. How are you doing? You know, 50% of trans masculine identified people attempt suicide every year, and that says a lot. It says a lot about, you know, acceptance in our culture as a whole, and how and where we're showing up for each other. So yeah, it's a very big part of it. And I think there have been many gains, but yeah, there have been some of these rollbacks, but some of those rollbacks are also just because we are so visible. And to me, social justice, racial justice has always been, it's a process, and you commit to the struggle and continuing to fight, because nobody ever said it was going to be easy, honestly.
Totally. I mean, and I think you said some other things that I think are part of the conversation that we have at Unmuted Nation all the time, right? People, we have so many Black conversations because Black people don't have, like, whatever. One point that you made is that you can support me, you know, in person, but also what are you doing when I'm not there?
Right.
Are you standing for us when I'm not there? And I paralleled that. So I saw a tweet yesterday that basically said that you cannot be pro-Black and anti-LGBT. And
yes,
there was so much confusion under it. But what I hear there is the same thing that you just said. If you're going to support me publicly,
right,
then behind closed doors, the same thing that all Black people are asking white people and other people to do.
Right.
And what I've said, at least for the last year, that racism is not going to be eradicated by Black people. It's going to be eradicated by white people talking to their racist ass uncles and their racist ass grandma. And that is really like, it's them having those conversations.
It's true.
The same way that we protect marginalized communities within our community is visibility and awareness and advocacy when they're not there. Yes. And I think that is such a simple concept, but it's not said enough. So I appreciate you for sharing that. I think that a lot of people don't think it. A lot of people don't think it's something that they need to do.
Right.
Allyship or advocacy is not about wearing a label or a t-shirt.
Right.
Or
right.
It's really just about using your voice and being who you say you are publicly.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, isn't that, I feel like from Cornel West, justice is what love looks like in public. I think, it's about showing up for each other. I think, it's amazing. We're obviously having all these conversations with the Black Lives Matter movement. I think for trans folks, especially Black trans folks, honestly, since I look at history, I always kind of look at this as in a historical lens, the fact that when you think about like Du Bois and all of the great Black writers and thinkers, creatives of the 1920s, there were so many of them who are LGBTQ. So the idea that like, this is new. And even the idea that this discussion is new, because that even back then, literally 100 years ago, the discussion was about respectability politics. Hey, if we as Black people want to get ahead, we can't have all of these identities. And then just kind of, you look around and sometimes people are recreating those same discussions. Now tell me, is Langston Hughes not as valuable because he was queer or gay? Like that's kind of silly to me. It's like we read his poetry and you love it because he's talented and he's creative. And, that's kind of the same thing that I and, many other people are at her doing, is we're just trying to show up for our greatness and for our Black excellence, and let us just have that.
I think I'm seeing so many parallels and I'm realizing so many parallels during this conversation about how important the education piece is, right? And I think in this time of enlightenment and progression, we are going to lose a lot of things if we don't change the way that we educate our own. And so forcing the system has been, I think all of my Blackness and pro-Blackness began with my mom. She's always been heavily into education, but Black education was at the forefront of that. So you are going to know Fannie Lou Hamer, you're going to know these names of the greats that were advocates for us and for you. And I think that same type of education has to be done on a wider spectrum, because, and I want to eradicate certain things. I got a whole life ahead of me, because Black people are not monolithic in any way. And I think that what we see, and people will say that they acknowledge that, and then approach Joe Biden about what is your Black agenda. Well, that's like you're feeding the purpose here, because there's not. There is there has to be a widespread, overarching, collective. If there's going to be one, it has to be inclusive of everybody. Yes. And we have to acknowledge that. And I think that acknowledgement is such a huge part of that. If you could speak to a young person that feels in some way that they may be trans and they're not sure, or they're not sure. They don't have anyone to talk to. They don't have anything but the internet. I had a conversation with my team yesterday, and we were talking about I lose hope for a lot of things just because technology has kind of dumbed a lot of things down. So we have really smart people that are also really dumb.
It's like these extremes. Yeah, it's like you'll know a lot about this one topic you read about on Wikipedia, and then
because you'll get curious about something, so you'll look it up.
Yeah, it's
but
funny.
You guys eat Tide Pods. I don't find the correlation there. You will buy all of the tickets for a racist convention, Trump rally, buy all the seats, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think with that, there has to be some we've got to be intentional, because they are stumbling upon information much much earlier.
Yes.
People are able to find out things earlier. And I tell parents, I know I have a lot of friends that are younger parents that they cringe when I'm like, your child has already undone the parental controls, like at the moment you walked away. And they put them back on when you come back. They know everything. Like, they get the technology while you're still looking at manuals and have to read directions. They are born knowing.
Right.
So they know the information. They know how they feel, so they'll look it up. And
right.
Well, before they ask you. And so what would you say to a younger child? And not even child, maybe a child, but a teenager,
right?
That stumbles upon this conversation, and they're like, I see myself in a lot of people, but my mom doesn't see me, and she won't see me, or my dad won't see me. What avenues are available?
So, Alex, it's funny. I'm just like, are you talking to my therapist? Because clearly we're on the same page. No, I mean, this is like, what would you say? I mean, I think the key is, one, to take your time. There is no rush on figuring out who you are. I mean, people come out also at so many different ages. You have people who are coming out in their 70s. They finally feel comfortable.
Niecy Nash.
Niecy Nash, and I already lived for her, so I was like really living for her. I was like, yes, go. But yeah, I think
it's the ownership for me. It's the ownership that's bam. No questions, no interviews.
Yes, yeah, on my own terms. And that's what I want to say is like, all of you, how you carry yourself, how you hold yourself, who you want to be, how you want to show up in the world, that is on your own terms. So you get to decide when if and when, because also I don't think there should necessarily be pressure around coming out, or actually there's a better term that I like, which is inviting in, which is this idea of like, I think similar to Niecy Nash, of just like, she didn't really say much. And then it's like, boom, I want to share my joy with you. And yes, it's because I'm with a same-sex partner, which is great, and so I think it's one, there's that. I think two, honestly, you have to assess your safety, because at the end of the day, we still, the stakes are very high, especially if you're Black and underprivileged, if you like come from a lower income background, et cetera, if like your parents are your lifeline in many ways. And, I think finding allies, again, if there's like an auntie, uncle, somebody who's accepting, family friend, like, definitely reach out. But I think it's important for you to assess the situation first before doing anything rash that could potentially harm you. And I think also, again, just like taking your time and being forgiving, giving yourself grace of like stumbling about, figuring out maybe you want to try out, one sort of pronouns, and then maybe that's not for you. There's also some trans folks who are like, like that served my purpose for this period of my life, but I don't really feel like that anymore. Or and there's other people the other way too. I explained to you, I felt so comfortable in my lesbian queer identity for the longest time, and then there was a moment where I was like, like I think that my personhood, my being is going in this other direction, and I think it's important for me to figure that out. So I think it's just crucial to be compassionate to yourself, to be loving to yourself, being kind, finding allies, finding people who can support you. And sometimes also it is also about having that online conversation. I feel like with Gen Z, they are all about, obviously all the TikToks and stuff, but there's just like a world of conversation around transness and like Facebook forums, etc. So I think
what I find interesting about them is that they don't like labels. So
yes,
they will like be trans and like whatever. They're everything.
Yeah.
And nothing at the same time. And it's like
it's funny. Well, I mean,
and I get it. I get it. I feel like if the freedom was available, we would have seen more of that earlier.
Right. Well, yes.
Yeah, they just don't care.
Well, one thing I will say though, I think with that, when we're speaking about this, is like some of the labels were important for political power. Literally, if you watch the movie Milk, like Harvey Milk, he's like, look, the civil rights, Black folks have their movement, the feminists have their movement, we need a movement. And I think if you understand LGBTQ history, it's like we've had to do so many things, right? And the idea was we need to be able to give ourselves a name so that we can claim power because these people are trying to oppress us. Now we're in a very different world. There's still a lot of areas that need to be pushed forward. Obviously, Black trans lives, just so many areas of sort of like economic disparity, et cetera. But I think there's been so much progress made in many ways that I could see for like Gen Z. They're like, oh, I can just be. I don't need these labels because it's like in so many ways there's not as much oppression in different areas.
Well, that freedom is available though because of those movements.
Because of those, exactly.
So and the history should be revered because without it.
Right.
This freedom would not be here. Like it's not
100%.
We have to remind people over and over again, like Black people legally have the right to vote in the 60s. Okay? So you can't put 100 years on that. It can't be forever. And so in that, I want to talk to you. Hit a point, and I know we're gonna run out of time, but hopefully you'll come back and we can do this. We can do this again. I want to talk about safety. Because you said when I'm talking about children and their own enlightenment, which does happen, a lot of times their own families aren't safe, and there are families that will hear me say that and reject it. They're gonna hear me. They're gonna say, "Alex, you're stirring up some BS." I love my child, but and it's like. The but is really the problem.
Yes.
You've got limitations and it's difficult. It's difficult. And I think while we can acknowledge that there's no manual for parenting, there's also not a life manual.
Right.
And so as a child dealing with anything, you don't really know what's gonna hit you or how it's gonna hit you or when it's gonna hit you. And so you hope that your parent can kind of guide you. Or at least be there to help you discover if your moment of enlightenment comes at a young age. But what if I think we just see the way that society responds, like we've made so many steps forward. Then I look at Zaya Wade and the responses from our own community. A lot of it rooted in ignorance. A lot of hurtful and harmful things coming, of course, rooted in toxic masculinity and toxic Black masculinity, which I've picked that a couple of times. We're going to do it again because you can't talk about it enough. But I think that there are advocates out there looking to preserve toxic masculinity. So on every level that you find freedom and progression, you find people literally stoking oppression and hoping to bring back the ways of, bondage. I would call it bondage because people weren't able to be themselves. So I don't.
Wow. Yeah.
And society has bound a lot of people, and I don't know. I really can't get with it. But when we talk about safety, one thing that I have to give credit really to my team because they bring it back to the forefront often. Black trans people are dying. Black trans bodies are being found, misgendered and misidentified, and nobody cares. Nobody's advocating. And I think the nobody probably is a misnomer. It's just not. The people with louder voices aren't doing it. Because the advocacy is there. I think it's there. But how can people that are like this moment is enlightening for them? They're like, wait a minute. Like they're just having a real ass conversation. It's a real surface level. Well, actually we got kind of deep. I guess it's not really surface level, but now they're thinking, how can I advocate? How can I, where can I go? And I think you've dropped so many gems. I think that I want to kind of dive into some of your resources and just learn more, because I think the opportunity is there and you don't know what you don't know. When you do know, you should do better. So how would you encourage people to speak out about trans issues? And everyone's not going to do this, but for me, I think trans issues are Black issues for me.
Yes. No, they are 100%. I think that I'm a big advocate of speaking out from where you're at. So, sometimes advocacy or allyship can literally be like, if you're a barber and there's a trans or non-binary, gender non-conforming person who wants a haircut for you, just give them a haircut and make them feel comfortable. Because believe it or not, like something like that, like very, very small things, I truly believe it's, the personal is political, the political is personal, and it really is about how are we relating to each other on a micro level? Because I think sometimes we can get bogged down by all these macro issues, but the question is, how are we showing up for each other? If you have like a trans niece, nephew, or, somebody in your family, how are you showing up for them? Are you able to check in with them? Are you able to just listen and support them, not judge them? And that I feel like it's showing up in those ways. I think also, if you want to do more, it's also about just tuning into the conversation. There's so many amazing folks in media, people like Raquel Willis, Devin Norell, Brian Michael Smith. There's just like tons of folks who are all about amplifying, Black trans issues, about tuning in, like, why are Black trans women being murdered in ridiculous numbers? When, I heard the story about in Florida about Tony McDade, a Black trans man who was killed by police, I have to wonder, where was the outcry? Because that is my reality. When I step out the door, the cops are not going to like think twice. Is this, is a man or what? No, I look like a black man, which I am, a Black man of trans experience, and those are my issues as well. So I think it's about also listening. I think it's about uplifting our voices. I think when it comes to listening, it's also about listening to what we're asking you to do. Because I also think sometimes people want to show up, but they want to show up on their own terms. And that may or may not always be what you actually need, right? It's like, okay. So, for our communities, it's about giving us opportunities, about supporting us with, policy changes and just treating us obviously like we're human.
Because you are
yes.
human, you are people. And I think one thing that came out when we were talking to Black trans women is that for so long, trans bodies have always just been over sexualized, and people are obsessed with the sexual aspects and changes and things that they want to ask questions. And again, like we say, the research is available. You can do it there. But aside from all of those things, trans people are people.
Yes,
trans people are human. So having those conversations is fine when you keep humanity in context. I think you can't like, just like you would not want somebody to defile the way that they talk about your own sexual experience.
Yes,
don't do it to trans people.
Yes, and one thing I want to add to that, Alex, if you're committed to Black liberation, I think once you connect the dots and you realize that so many of these toxic behaviors are rooted in white supremacy, because remember, how are Black bodies just in general treated? Black men, cis men are over-sexualized. For Black women, cis women, they're also over-sexualized. Like, you think about, okay, well, if that's the way that white supremacy treats Black bodies, why are we then doing that again to trans people, right? Like,
I literally, there's a running joke that I can't go one show without talking about white supremacy. And here we are again, because it is rooted in everything that you see, everything. And it's not a bad thing to talk about it.
Yeah.
It has to be talked about because it is Black people, and I talk to Black people mostly. So I'm like, we will perpetuate these ideals, and we are perpetuating the white supremacy, some of the roots. And once you see it, you have a responsibility to take it or destroy it at the root, because it can't remain. And you asked the perfect question. This is rooted in white supremacy. Why are we still doing it?
Exactly.
Like,
but
it just is what it is. And I think that the change begins within, which is why we want to keep having these conversations. Like,
definitely.
I feel like, again, I had no idea what I was going to go into, what I was coming into. These conversations are always weird because I know, like, even like 5 minutes before, I'm like, tell me more. What do I not know? So give me as much information about this person. And I try to do, like, I try to come to the conversation, you know, level-headed and educated. But each time I leave with just more enlightenment. And I think I really appreciate you just for sharing your story and being honest and open. It's my true desire that you just continue to thrive in all that you do, like in all of the thousands of things that you said at the beginning. I hope things continue. I want to give you a final word and just whatever you'd like to say. Use this platform. Usually I ask a question like, what would you tell a mom or something like that? But I'll give you the last word. Just what is something that you would like people to know about yourself? Doesn't have to be about your trans experience, but I think people we have to keep the framing. You're a person. And so this is about people and people being heard.
Well, I mean, we touched on so many things, and also I'm just, you know, so grateful. This conversation has just been so beautiful in so many ways. I think, you know, it's important for folks to know, look, Black transness is Black excellence. You know, to me, that's like the biggest thing is stop, you know, support us and just letting us be great and live our lives and just show up for us. You know, to me, that's really the big thing is I think for us, if you're truly about loving Black people and Black liberation, that means supporting and loving all Black people, and for that love and support to be unconditional. And I think, you know, it starts from within, like you said. It's not much else I could say.
No, absolutely. And thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. And please keep in touch. How do people, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, well, you can find me on social media at Sydney Ballou, so SYDNUY, B as in boy, ALOUE. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and my website's on there too. It's just my name, sydneyballou.com. Definitely check out Legendary, you know, if you're looking for a great competition show to enjoy. And again, Alex, thank you so very much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. We will keep in touch. And I'll make sure your contact information is everywhere. Hopefully you will come back and definitely stay in touch. These conversations continue. Sydney Ballou, thank you so much for coming to Unmuted Nation. And Black Transman, hear me. You just heard him. And hopefully you take this conversation to heart. Share it with your family. Share it with your friends. The conversation continues. We will not stop. Okay? Unmuted Nation continues. Stay with us.